Let me start also by thanking everyone who has taken time off from important activities this Saturday to join us in celebrating the life of a woman who was my partner for 37 years. And of course, as you know, Vivian was also a mother of 3 successful children. She was also a teacher of many, both in Cameroon and the United States, as well as a colleague who collaborated with her peers to establish one of the most successful online graduate programs in children's literature. When Professor Sinfree and Professor Richard Mbi first contacted me about this program shortly after Vivian passed, I did not know what form it would take. I am really glad to see that they were successful in bringing together not just her Penn State colleagues, but also her friends in other institutions, her former students, and many others in different parts of the world who knew Vivian in one capacity or the other. Vivian's life is worth celebrating. In her quiet way, she was a truly remarkable woman. And let me just pause to say, you know, I'm really filled with emotions as I see our grandson, Katatai, with the mother and the father participating, you know, in this program. It's wonderful. I'm sure the spirit of Vivian is joyful wherever she is. So why do I say Vivian was a remarkable woman? She grew up in a small plantation town in Cameroon named Lobe, very remote. In fact, children who grew up in those plantation towns were often looked down upon as people who can't accomplish anything. But from those humble beginnings, no one could have predicted that this shy little girl would become the author of several books and articles, and a professor in one of the most distinguished universities in the world. For me, Vivian was not a wife in the traditional sense. She was more of an intellectual partner. She was really, you know, an intellectual partner. From the moment of our marriage in 1984, we both were working towards graduate degree programs. For me, I was working towards the PhD, while Vivian was working for the master's. As the children came along, Yannick first, then Luma, then Joy, we integrated them into our academic lives, whether it is the University of Connecticut, Dickinson College, Yaoundé University, Bloomsburg University, Penn State. Our children, in fact, grew up around these institutions. And Vivian somehow managed to balance her teaching, which she was very good at, her research, with the raising of these 3 children, taking them along to job interviews and academic conferences, both in the United States and around the world. Naturally, as academics, most of our communication centered around educating our children and the advancement of our professional careers. That was good in a way because we excelled really in that respect. okay? Like everything else, you know, it had its own drawbacks. From discussing graduate school coursework, dissertation topics, syllabi for the various courses we taught, to sharing ideas for conferences and articles and books, we never lacked something to talk about if it came to academics. In all of this, Vivian supported and motivated me, as well as I supported, you know, her. Let me give you an example, which has stuck in my mind and will stick forever. After teaching for 1 year in Clarion University, Vivian joined me in the English department of Bloomsburg University as an assistant professor. Given our level of scholarly productivity, Vivian started to encourage me to apply for full professor. But I had just been promoted to associate professor in 1996, 2 years before Vivian joined Bloomsburg. And I kind of felt that having been promoted before tenure, it would not look good, you know, if I started going up again, you know, for another professor, for another promotion. Also, besides the work of putting together an application for full professor, okay, that was also a handicap. I thought it was easier to just write an article than start putting all the stuff together, you know, to become full professor. When Vivian noticed my reluctance, she told me that she wants me to go for full professor because she intends to apply for associate professor the following year. Okay, immediately I realized a certain pattern, you know, which is not only unique to Vivian, but amongst Black women. Vivian did not want to compete with her husband. She didn't want to feel that, you know, she'll become associate, you know, and I'm associate. And that was the motivation. I realized that, okay? And the following year, in 1999, I did apply to become full professor, which I got in 2000. In 2001, Vivian became associate professor. But her level of productivity was so high that she started applying for full professor from 2005. Unfortunately, Bloomsburg is a teaching university. So the kind of recognition that she would receive for her publication, you know, was not there. After 3 years of applying, Vivian got promoted finally, but by that time, she had already decided to accept the position in Penn State as associate professor. Why do I say this? I say this to illustrate how much our academic careers dominated our lives, really dominated our lives, everything that, you know, we did. But Vivian also was involved in numerous outreach programs designed to promote literacy, not just here in the United States, but also in Nigeria and Cameroon. She established a library in the town where she grew up. She sent books, you know, to the village, helped, you know, run a school that her mother, you know, supported, and a whole lot, you know, of literacy programs that she did. As many of her students would acknowledge, she touched the lives of many in a quiet but significant way. I remember one time when she started recruiting graduate students, doctoral students into Penn State. You know, she recruited, you know, these 2 women, and they were looking for places. They didn't have a place to stay. And Vivian gave one of them the key to her apartment, you know, for her to stay there. That's how attached, that's how connected Vivian was, you know, to her students. During one of my study abroad trips to Cameroon, and let me just say that Vivian wrote a lot of scholarly works, as you all know, but she also was a very, very talented creative writer, you know, something which, you know, has gone unrecognized. Yeah, people don't know that's kind of invisible. And one of her books, Real Mothers, is a short novel which I think contributes something different from African women writing, which I hope would be discovered, you know, one day. It's called Real Mothers. So during one of my study abroad trips to Cameroon, I decided to include this short novel, Real Mothers, in my African women writers class. I was teaching one course in African women writing. Now, the book itself is unique because it celebrates the life of a single mother. You know, Cameroon, like most African places, are patriarchal. And being a single mother, being children, you know, the son of a single mother, you are looked at as outcast, you know, in society. But Vivian wrote this book from her own experience growing up, celebrating the life of 3 generations, you know, of single mother. So I decided to, in order to enable my students experience genuine cultural immersion in Cameroon, I decided to write, to adapt this book, Real Mothers, into a play, and have my American students, you know, perform it to a largely Cameroonian, you know, audience at the University of Boya. I don't want to drag this too much. I just want to give you a glimpse of this performance. Okay, and so that you can get a sense of not just the American students acting out African Cameroonian parts, but also the response, you know, of the audience.
Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. I just wanted to share, not only for myself, but also for Worlds of Words, because Vivian interacted with so many of us. She was a person who really informed our thinking, and Worlds of Words is we're a whole group of people who think about global literature. And her scholarship was so important to us because of the work that she did. And just as one example that I think is such a good example of how her work, she lived her work in ways that reflected her own agency and her strong connections to Africa. She did a conference session where each of the researchers was analyzing a particular picture book that's set in Cairo. And she came in and did a very close analysis of that book. But what she did is, instead of using her theory to critique, what she did instead was to show, instead of criticizing the stereotypes in that book, She looked at how the main character, a boy in Cairo, how his life showed agency. And what she said to me was that she wanted to encourage children from his cultural background to not accept the book's negative images of themselves and their culture, but to use a critical lens to negotiate alternative images. And I just thought that was such an example of how she constantly sought in her work to come in from a different perspective in order to really show agency and to portray agency instead of just to look at the stereotypes and the problems. He was always a person who understood the complexity of issues and would dig deeply in them and discuss them and think about them. He was also such a mentor to new scholars in the field. And one of my colleagues, Yu-Kyung Sung, one of the things that she said about Vivian is that Yu-Kyung is from Korea, and she said Vivian was a person who, as a transnational scholar, really understood the struggle that other emerging transnational scholars were having. And she found ways to give them places to write and to share their work and just to make space for them and to really understand the experiences that they were going through themselves. She was also somebody that on a very personal level, whenever I would go to a conference, the first thing that I would see is her wide smile, her laughter, her warm greetings. And she always had time to sit down and have a long conversation. When you met Vivian in a hallway, you had to sit down and have a chat. And in that chat, your thinking was stretched and your mind expanded, and you just felt so much connection with her. So when Vivian passed, there were so many people who talked about the wide influence that she'd had and the number of different people that she had touched in so many ways. And I just continue to marvel at her willingness to give so much of her own time and her effort to develop and promote all kinds of initiatives around international literature. And at the same time, she lived out such a deep commitment and connection to other scholars and to educators. Vivian's somebody that I will hold in my heart and in my mind as a demonstration of what it means to be both a dedicated scholar and a remarkable human being. She was truly someone who changed the world. Thank you.
I just want to thank everyone for joining and helping to celebrate Vivian today. And I know there's so much I have to say, but I won't be long because I want to give everybody else an opportunity. But I want to share Dr. Patrick Shannon's letter to us about Vivian. And it says, in honor of Vivian, I write in the present tense because Vivian lives in my head, my hands, and my heart, as she does for all of us around the world who learned from her. I understand Vivian as a literacy scholar who recognizes the power in the continuous pursuit of answers to two questions: what is reading for, and what can writing do? She implies her answers to both questions in a single sentence deep within her article, Individuals versus Communal Healing, an analysis of African novelists, representation of young women. Still, there are some authors who let their African female adolescent characters live in their society, examine their options, and make tough decisions as they search for identities suitable for their evolving needs. For Vivian, reading is the tool for examining, making, and searching continuously to reconcile historical tensions between suitable and evolving within everyday contexts of unequal power, signaled by Vivian's choice of the phrase, "some authors let." That still conveys Vivian's radical, democratic conviction that all are morally equal, who each have the capacity to learn to use this tool, the right to use it to participate socially in making those tough decisions according to their understanding of their needs, and the agency to act in order to redefine just what suitable could mean personally and socially. For Vivian, that agency of action demonstrates what writing can do. It furthers and deepens the examining, making, and searching to find suitable identities, and establishes and promotes the participation of those identities within the struggles to name and remove the barriers that distribute power unequally among equals. Count Vivian among some authors. I add my voice and my tears in the celebration of Vivian as a literacy scholar. Her challenge to me and all to recognize what reading is for and what reading is for and what writing can do lives on. I hope my hands can become as skillful as hers in these struggles. Dr. Patrick Shannon. And again, I just want to share, Vivian was my sister, my friend, my mentor. And I met Vivian in Dr. Patrick Shannon's class back in 1996, and the rest is history. So I just wanted to give voice to Dr. Shannon. He couldn't be here with us today, but when we reached out to him, but I think the very next day, he sent us that letter in honor of Vivian. Thank you.
Thanks so much for inviting me to speak. I'm actually at Penn State now. I did my doctorate at Arizona State, but I was one of Vivian's colleagues in the Penn State College of Education, the Children's Lit program for the past 4 years. So I just want to take a second to thank the organizers of this event. I really appreciate the chance to hear these stories and speak about my experience with Vivian. And I just want to offer condolence to Vivian's family and friends. It's one of those bittersweet things to be able to gather and hear all these stories and learn so much. And then obviously that's a loop, which makes us wish, we could have more of those memories. But I really appreciate being able to hear all these stories. So I was Vivian's colleague here at Penn State for the past couple of years in the Children's Lit program. So I can attest to a lot of things that have already been said about her centrality to that program and the way that she built that up, and just the folks that I've met who have come through that program and gone out into the world, into that field, to be a small part of that and to see that is really inspiring. But I'd actually met Vivian about 12 years before that, when I was still a classroom teacher. I was teaching middle school and high school English, and on the book that Terry just mentioned, that's the project that I met her through Dr. Mary Napoli. So this is kind of crazy to think about in this day and age. We're so used to Zoom events like this and Zoom teaching, but 12 years ago, that wasn't very common. So I actually hadn't met Dr. Mary Napoli. I hadn't met Vivian. I hadn't met Terry in person. I was teaching. I'd gone through the Capital Area Writing Project at Penn State Harrisburg, and I'd done this brand new thing 10 years ago called a webinar. So I did a presentation live for some teachers, and it was video recorded, and it was cast out to the world, which seemed like such a novel idea 10 years ago. And it took lots of bells and whistles back then, way more than what we have installed on the average computer now. It was kind of like a TV studio. It felt very high tech at the time for probably what was a low tech quality video and sound. But Mary Napoli was watching that presentation, and Mary reached out to me and got in touch with me. I had not met her face to face about a project she was working on with Terry and Vivian, which became Adolescents Rewrite Their World. And she asked me if I would be willing to contribute some of the work that I'd presented in the form of chapters. So it was through email that I got to know Vivian, and this generosity that everyone's talking about, this way of sort of helping younger scholars. I mean, I was a classroom teacher that had not done any work in academia, and here I am interacting with folks with doctoral degrees at these institutions that I respected. And not only did they invite me to contribute, but at one time, I don't know if you remember this, Terry, but it was, I think it was Vivian's idea, well, we're all gonna be co-editors, right? Everybody's an editor. So not only like come contribute to this book as a classroom teacher, but help edit it. And it was just such an invitation and so generous. And that book was through Roman and Littlefield. Eventually they said, sorry, you can't have like 12 co-editors. You have to pick one. So we all decided Vivian and Terry would be the right folks. But that spirit of generosity continued. I didn't meet Vivian in person for a couple more years until an NCTE event when a mutual friend finally introduced us in person. And she was referencing presentations of mine she had attended. So we had circled around each other and she was familiar with me. And I'd worked with her on the book interactively, but to get to finally meet her in person and then start to meet other folks like Ruth at other NCTE events that knew Vivian and start to build this network. She was just always so kind and so generous, and to get to know me in this way. And when I made the transition into academia and was finally on the job market, and I'm out in Arizona at that time, I'd moved away from Pennsylvania, I was far out looking at nationwide job search. A job comes up at Penn State and Vivian's the search committee chair. So being able to come back and reconnect with her and have had this past experience and the way that she sort of walked me through that process, welcomed me into the Penn State community, and was just such a mentor to me in these first couple of years, and just the way that I'm learning. There's so many things. I didn't know Vivian nearly as well as many of you. I'm learning so many things about her creative accomplishments and professional accomplishments, and each one of those little tidbits that just sort of comes out it just increases my admiration of her, and having spent some time with her. And I think Dr. Akima, you mentioned it in your opening, but you said her quiet but significant influence. I think my story, my experience with her, and even though I didn't know her well, and it was kind of these little pieces, she had a really sincere, a really important influence on my trajectory. And I think those words, quiet but significant, are a really great way to say it. And I think what I'll miss most about Vivian, what I'll always miss, is what Kathy Short already said, is her laughter. The way that her laughter would fill up not a room, but a hallway, but a building, right? Like you knew when Vivian was in chambers because you'd walk down the hall and just hear that unreserved laughter. And there was, I know that you all know what I'm talking about, but there was nothing like hearing Vivian tell a story and get to that point where she was cracking herself up. And I really appreciated that. That was such an invitation to me when she was telling stories about how crazy the academy can be, and the moves that different people made, and this space that seemed so strange to me coming from so much time as a classroom teacher, and the way she would share these stories and be like, watch out for this thing. And she would tell me with great gusto this story of helping me sort of learn how to navigate this place and this space, and it would always end with that belly laughter that filled up the whole room, and that's something I'll always miss. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak, and my condolences to Vivian's friends and family, and I'm really appreciative of the chance to be here with you all today.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is EVELYN Freeman, and I'm a professor emerita at The Ohio State University and immediate past president of the United States Board on Books for Young People. And I'm honored to be here to share some thoughts about Vivian's professional contributions and service to the international children's literature community. Specifically, her involvement in one of the organizations that Joy mentioned, IBI, the International Board on Books for Young People, which is headquartered in Basel, Switzerland. And it's really meaningful to me that the celebration of Vivian's life is today, April 2nd, because it's Hans Christian Andersen's birthday, and also the IBI-sponsored International Children's Book Day, a day to inspire a love of reading and call attention to children's books. And interestingly enough, Vivian, in one of her many presentations internationally, gave a paper called Outsiders in Hans Christian Andersen's Fairy Tales. And she gave this presentation at the IBI Congress in Copenhagen, Denmark, in September of 2008. So what better way to celebrate this particular International Children's Book Day than to celebrate and remember, as Kathy called it, and I called it, the remarkable life and career of a remarkable woman who was committed to these goals and to providing all children access to quality children's books. Vivian's involvement in IBBY spanned over 2 decades. And for those of you not familiar with IBBY, I think it's important to mention what the organization is about because it resonated so much with Vivian and who she was. IBBY was founded in 1953 by a woman named Jelle Lettmann, a German Jew who had left Germany in 1936 for England during the rise of the Nazis. Jelle returned to Germany after the war to found the International Youth Library in Munich and IBBY. Lettmann believed that children's books provide a bridge to understanding, and IBBY's mission today is to bring peace and understanding across the globe through children's books. Today, IBBY has over 80 national sections, the US being one of them. So IBBY's mission resonated with Vivian, and she contributed to this organization in multiple ways. She had several peer-reviewed scholarly articles about African children's books that was published in Bookbird, IBBY's Journal of International Children's Literature. She also wrote reviews of children's books for the postcard section of the journal. Vivian was a frequent presenter at IBBY regional conferences and at biennial world congresses. And I always looked forward to seeing Vivian at these professional meetings, where she greeted me, as Kathy mentioned and others have, with a wide smile, with warmth, with caring, and with the desire to talk. I always learned so much from both her professional presentations and our personal talks. We enjoyed time together in Cape Town, Athens, Copenhagen, Basel, where apparently I probably did meet Joy, and other locales. Vivian was also very active in the United States section of IBBY, USBBY, US section. She was an elected board member and served her term on the board, as she did with everything, with commitment and dedication. In recognition of her impact and service to IBBY, USBBY awarded Vivian an honorary membership in memoriam at the IBBY Regional Conference held this past March at Vanderbilt University in Nashville. Loretta Henderson and Ruth were both able to accept this recognition on behalf of Vivian's family. Vivian, to me, epitomized a scholar and citizen of the world. Her contributions to international children's literature are deep and span the globe. She truly helped create bridges of understanding among all people. Her commitment, her caring, and her depths of knowledge will be deeply missed, but her legacy will be with us always. Thank you again for this opportunity to share some thoughts.
Okay, thank you so much. So the little that I feel like I have to contribute, I kind of have been thinking through, and ever since I knew that this was coming down the pike, that we're each gonna have a chance to talk, when it was mentioned, you know, that I'm supposed to speak about Vivian as a scholar, I thought about, first of all, she's an amazing scholar, but how hard it is to distinguish where does she end as a mother and begin as a scholar? Where does she end as a friend and begin as a scholar? Because to me, those lines always blurred. And I call her an academic mother, but I don't necessarily even have to just say academic mother. She was just a mother. You could say academic friend, but that's inappropriate as well. She's just a friend. And so if it's not inappropriate, I'll share a little story with you that I think maybe can unveil a little bit about the multifaceted person that I got to know. I came to grad school as a little bit of an older scholar. I already had 2 children when I started my PhD program, and by the time I ended, I had 3 kids. And Vivian would often talk about, and I believe as somewhat of a magical thinker or spiritual person, she latched on to things that she felt were parallels or that she noticed from her own lived experience. And so when I would say, hey, Vivian, I've got these little kids, I'm just digging myself into debt here in school, she would pounce on that and say, hey, I had kids when I was in grad school. This is what I did. And she would buoy me up and help me feel like I was doing okay. We connected because I had spent some time teaching in Latin America and then also teaching in Mozambique. And she looked for those connections, and she felt like the universe had micromanaged our friendship a little bit. And I loved looking at the world through those lenses, that there was micromanaging, that there was something bigger than us bringing us together. And then here's the little story. So I, as a little bit of an older scholar, when I was coming to get my PhD and trying to get through as quickly as possible because I had these little kids, I had already interviewed and gotten a job, but my dissertation wasn't done. And Vivian got it to a point with me. She said, Paul, I've got to go be a human. And she would often talk about how she needed to re-energize, and she would go take a train here or fly there or go write a book, et cetera, et cetera. And she was going to certain parts of Northern Africa. And the way it was described to me, she said, I'm going to ride a camel. I have to ride a camel. and so I was so excited for her, except that while she was gone, I found myself stuck as far as my writing was concerned. And I had pushed and pushed and pushed, and I felt like I had earned some of the muscles, and then suddenly Vivian was gone, and I was like, oh, I'm not making progress. Started to sleep less, started to eat less, started to stress more. And I didn't think that there was a way to communicate what I was, feeling, because she told me, I am not going to be available for a couple of months. It's just not possible. And I said, okay. And then it finally got to a point where I had a very humiliating or humbling, I'm not sure where one, sometimes the difference, a conversation with my wife. And I just said, Steph, I've got a job. I'm not going to finish this dissertation in time. What in the heck do we do? She came and picked me up from school. I went home, and when I got home, I just sat in my room in our little living below the poverty line apartment in State College, because that's what was happening to us. And I sent this pretty thrifty email to Vivian, and I said, Vivian, I'm ashamed. I've tried my hardest and it's not working. I don't know when you're going to see this, but I feel like I've let you down, and I'm so sorry. And that was kind of it. About, if I remember correctly, about 90 minutes later, I got a text, and it was from a different number than the one that I had for Vivian. It was one she used when she was on international travel. And she said, call me now. So I said, okay. And I called her, and I was ready to just say, hey, Vivian, thank you so much. You've been a wonderful friend. I just kind of have to face the music. This is falling apart. And as soon as I said, hello, Vivian, she didn't even wait for me to give my excuse or my sob story or anything. She just said, where are you? And I said, I'm at my apartment. She said, get in your car. And I love saying this because she was a tough love person who pushed people to be their best selves. She said, get in your car. I said, okay. I didn't know what else to do. Got in my car, I drove to campus. She said, Paul, what is happening to your dissertation? I said, I'm lost. I can't figure it out. I'm trying to get these findings in this discussion. It's so confusing to me. And she said, stop right there and just know this. I'm going to stay on this phone with you until we have figured this out. And so quit telling me that you're not figuring it out. We will figure it out together. We stayed on the phone for a few hours. When we hung up, I felt like I was going to be able to accomplish the thing. And here I am in my little office, so you know how things worked out. But I think it's important to note that when I hung up the phone, I did some calculations and I realized she had hung up the phone at 4 o'clock in the morning, her time. And that for a person who had cancer and who could have easily said, you know, it's time for me to cash in, it's time for me to live, and kind of look at me, to the very end, she was looking outward and she was pulling people up. I will always love her for that. And one of the things I've talked about, it blurring, right? Where does she end as a mother? Where does she begin as a scholar? Where does she end as a scholar? Where does she begin as a friend? Linear time has blurred for me, because the past tense of Vivian is the present tense of Vivian is the future of Vivian, and it's all of us, right? And she has helped me become enough of a magical thinker to believe that she's still here. And I'll just tell you one last thing. When the dissertation that was falling apart, that's just a small thing in a world of actual huge macro problems, but it was one of the micro things that was killing me at the time. When that was all done, came up to her and gave her a big old hug. I told her what she meant to me. You know, I wrote her a letter and all of this. And she said, Paul, I appreciate what you're saying, but I also want you to know that what I have done for you has been done for me. And if you will do this for somebody else, then it wasn't in vain. That's enough of a sermon to keep us in business for the rest of forever. What Vivian has done for us, I think we owe it to everybody else. Let's keep on passing that forward. And if we do, then her life and her example and her passing and her love, all of that I think can live on. So those are some of the words I'd like to share.
Hello, everyone. I'm Joy, Vivian's last child. So my parents initially, like my dad had mentioned, had my brothers when they were in school at the University of Connecticut in Storrs, Connecticut, but they had since returned back to Cameroon before they gave birth to me, and we're fortunate that after 2 boys, I came along. Now, my brothers are unable to attend and they send their regrets, but I said I would step up and talk about her as a mother for our family. Oftentimes, you know, when we, like my dad had stated, we grew up on campus. We grew up on campuses, different campuses. I don't so much remember Dickinson, but I quite remember Bloomsburg. I quite remember Clarion. I quite remember Penn State, you know, often. And that was not only as when she was a professor, but when she was more so as a student at Penn State. And those made a big impression on our lives and where we have come to be. Education, as you can imagine, was a very important part, and that was impacted both from my father and my mother extremely. They, you know, they wanted to make sure that just as they had, you know, seen academic success, they wanted to get their children, you know, right in that nature to also pursue strong academic success. My mom not only was a teacher of books, but she was also a teacher of the world. One of my, you know, great connections with her was when she would go on a trip with either NCTE, IBE, all of the organizations. I can't, so many acronyms that she belonged to, World Congress, you know. She would make sure to take me. I was the fortunate one, again, most likely because I was a girl. That got to accompany her. And because of that, I was exposed to so many different things. One of the first trips I remember going with her was to Switzerland for an IBE conference. And there I was, when I was 13, I was profoundly impressed to meet another 13-year-old in Switzerland who educated me on the fact that she spoke at that time French and Spanish and English and German and was learning Mandarin. And I was like, what are we doing in the United States that this 13-year-old is fluent in like 5 different languages and I am here speaking English? You know, so not to say that my parents didn't try to teach me French, but, you know, I may not have been receptive. But in general, she just exposed me to different cultures, and actually different cultures, not just being in the United States and teaching me about the different cultures, but I was fortunate because of, you know, her work, her career, that I was able to actually, you know, go and experience different cultures and be a student of the world. When I was younger and my parents were growing in their careers, it was something of wonder as far as a young child to not necessarily grow up with a mother who was there all the time. And, you know, at the time I was growing up, you know, my mom was going through bettering herself and pursuing her doctorate at State College. That meant she wasn't home all the time. That meant my dad was taking care of the 3 of us. We were spending a lot of time at Bloomsburg. That meant we went to camps all the time. You know, I saw my mom, you know, sometimes only a weekend. Then we celebrate that graduation in 1996 thinking, okay, she's going to be here now. That wasn't necessarily the case as far as, you know, the transition wasn't so smooth initially to get to Bloomsburg. And so we went with her on interviews, as my dad stated, and she, you know, she pushed trying to figure out what her next step was. She wasn't done, you know, with her service to herself and with her service to the career of teaching, with her service to engaging other minds besides her children. You know, we'd go to Lincoln, we'd go to different Millersville, different schools, Indiana University, to try and figure out where my mom would find a fit. And she eventually found one in Clarion for some time. That wasn't so easy once again, because Bloomsburg, as you know, is not very close to Clarion. But, you know, for the sake of her career, for the sake of pushing forward, you know, and for the sake of value, her own self-value, she was committed to her cause. And so she worked at Clarion for some time, and we made it work as a family. We made it work. You know, as a young child, you wonder, like, why, you know, why is this so important? And then you look back, as I look back as an adult, I realized the importance of self-value, the importance of self-worth that she had in herself, her own inner drive. And you realize how impressive it is to come from where she's come from and to continue to push for what you deserve and push for what you're worth. And eventually she made it back to Bloomsburg, and we were whole again as a unit, as a family. And then eventually she made it back to State College, which is, you know, where she really loved to be. So getting to Penn State, I don't know how many of you really know what Penn State meant to my mother, as where she earned her doctorate now 26 years ago. Last year was the 25th anniversary of her accomplishing her doctorate at Penn State main campus. Last year was the 25th anniversary of it. And they did a presentation for her. She had a slide, and she talked about how thankful she was that she was able to return back to the institution that she was able to get her doctorate from and pay it forward to other students and help them attain their own greatness and find their own way to make an impact in the world, because that was something that was extremely important. The culture in general of Penn State, everything about the community meant a lot. As you can see, I'm wearing a Penn State shirt. My husband's wearing a Penn State cap. We are Penn Staters through and through, and that came from my mother. To focus specifically on Penn State, I grew up on that campus when she was in school there. My brothers and I used to run through the halls of the Chambers building all the time, burning popcorn and wreaking havoc through the offices. She used to take us to the creamery back at its old location that very few knew, you know, back then. It was located closer to like the Beaver Stadium. Now it's not the Beaver Stadium, but mainly in the middle of campus. Now it's close to Beaver Stadium as the campus continues to expand. And the times when we couldn't be on campus with her to actually go get ice cream, she would bring it home to us, and she'd make sure she got freeze-dried ice, and she would actually bring it home to us along with different things like comic books or new young adult literature that she was trying to get us to read, so we could give her opinions for her studies and her publications. So in Penn State, just the whole campus, everything meant so much to her. And in turn, she passed it down to her children. Penn State means so much to us, the community, just everything about it, because it was such a important part of her life. My father talked about her coming from a patriarchal society and being shy. As a daughter, she made sure that, you know, even though she was raised in a patriarchal culture, she challenged me often to challenge the norm, to challenge the patriarchy. And I know, Professor Napoli, you may remember the time when I commented about an award that featured a girl sitting while the men were standing. And I said, why? Why does the girl have to sit in this award? You know what, that's not fair. You know, when we're talking about equality here, why should the girl have to sit? And so, you know, those are some of the things that she was able to pass down to me, you know, as somebody who challenged the patriarchy. And in reference to her shyness, her extrovertedness came out when she was doing what she loved, her career, her work, and being around Penn State. Those are all things that she loved to do. My brothers and I got her tickets to, you know, the Penn State football games, and she was very wary about going initially, but then she got into it and it became a thing. She had to do it. Season tickets, and then going to coaching clinics, meeting the coaches. I'm not sure if you guys know of that side of her, but she was meeting the coaches, meeting the players, interacting and engaging. And it made her so happy, and it made her so jovial, you know, that just, it was just wonderful to see, you know, that side of her. In 2018, her impact that she was leaving in Penn State really came to a head when this shy and extroverted professor was actually in a commercial for them that was in their 2018 brand spot for Penn State football. And if you guys have some time right now, I would like to share that commercial with you in case you didn't get a chance to see it. So I'm just going to share the screen, and I'm going to play that commercial for you briefly.
Imagine
it works. No, Joy, it works now.
Then study it. Take a good hard look. Look at it through this. Turn it on. Turn it off. See what you think tomorrow. Talk about it with him. Share it with her. Test it. Test it again. Try it over here, bring it over there. Put it in action. See how it could help them, or them, or them. We're here to make all of this happen. Who's we? One community of students, faculty, staff, partners, and alumni, imagining, collaborating, and inventing our way to a better world.
So to close up, to imagine that somebody who was so shy can come full circle because of her love for an institution, because of a love of her studies, because, you know, she saw more of herself as to what she can give back to her children and the students who she works with, can come out of her shell to feature herself into a video, a commercial that was aired nationally. You know, that tells you a lot about what Penn State did for my mom, what her academics, her studies did for my mom, you know, and how it shaped her into who she chose to be, who she decided to be when she was able to see more and see more value in herself. And, you know, that meant a lot to me as the child of her, watching what she can develop into, and if she just opened herself up more, and what I could eventually develop into as I open myself up to different things that, you know, I may have anxiety about. So, you know, I thank you guys for taking the time to listen to me. I thank you for coming on the celebration of my mother, and, you know, I appreciate all the love and support that we've gotten as a family.